Just want to say hello and welcome to this episode of the Lookthrough Lens podcast. I'm Olaf, your host, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by two leaders shaping the future of our industry. Andrea Palmer, the recently appointed CEO of CRREM, and Marcel Staub, CEO of Lookthrough. Now, for those who may not know, CRREM is at the forefront of helping real estate professionals navigate the path to decarbonization. And Lookthrough is proud to be a licensed CRREM partner, integrating their framework into our platform. Andrea, Marcel, thank you both for being here. Andrea, let's start with you. Can you share a bit about your professional journey and what inspired you to take on the role of CEO at CRREM?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Right. So, I'm originally from the States. I grew up in Chicago. And I started working in real estate investment. I was on the investor capital raising team. So we were raising money from institutional investors around the world. And the Dutch pension funds were some of our big clients. And they, back then, this was already 12, 13 years ago, they were already asking us to integrate sustainability into what we were doing on the portfolio management side. And that inspired me actually to move to Amsterdam to work for GRESB. So I worked there for some time, wanted to get a view of how other institutional players were approaching sustainability and ESG in their portfolio management. And then I later closed that loop, moving over to PGGM. After 5 years leading responsible investment for the listed real estate portfolio at PGGM. This opportunity came up to lead CRREM. While at CRREM, I think it's such a new organization, a lot of challenges, needs a lot of energy, attention, drive, etc.
Marcel, you've worked closely with CRREM for some time now. What first drew you to their work, and what are you looking forward to with Andrea's appointment as CEO?
Yeah, so I think similar to what Andrea said, we have some customers in the Netherlands. And because CRREM and GRESB and those initiatives are well known in the Netherlands, this is how we got to meet the CRREM path. And we later on realized that most of our clients do have decarbonization goals and they want to be net zero by 2050 or 2040 or whatever their internal goals are. And typically when we ask them how they want to get there, we don't really get an answer. So they don't really have a plan on how this curve should look like, right? So for most people, it's somewhat of a straight line leading there, or then it's a continuation of how things are being done today up to a certain point where then at this point, they basically want to be from one day to the next, they want to be at net zero. So that curve kind of like looks different for everyone. And what I believe the importance of CRREM is that someone sets out a academic or a reasonable benchmark of what curve you should follow. And I think that is of utter importance. And ever since we have incorporated that CRREM path into our system on a country by country basis and also based on building typology, so that our customers have some sort of a guideline of what they should follow as in a curve down to net zero that actually makes sense and is not just a simple out of the box idea of how you could get there. So this is how we got to meet and appreciate CRREM, and ever since we are promoting it as the de facto standard when you want to know what your curve should look like. And much as you said, Andrea, I think we've noticed that CRREM was maybe lacking a bit of the leadership person that it has now gained through you. That really takes this to the next level. So we're really happy for you to be here and very much looking forward to how you will shape the future of CRREM.
Andrea, hearing Marcel's perspective, how do you see partners like Lookthrough helping to realize your vision for CRREM, especially as CRREM pushes to be a global standard, which I believe is the goal?
Yeah, I think groups like Lookthrough are where the rubber hits the road. So just as Marcel was alluding to, a pathway is really helpful because most of the kind of ESG standards, performance ranking, etc., they're all backward looking. But as a very capital intensive asset class like real estate, you need something that gives you an indication of where you need to be in 10 years from now, in 15 years from now, because that's how long hard infrastructure lasts at a minimum. So that provides that kind of forward-looking basis, but it also requires a lot more support than that. And that's not support that CRREM itself is able to provide. We need specialists like you guys to be able to support the market with that, to support real estate owners with decision-making tools that actually help them to get from point A to point B in a smooth, constructive manner. So yeah, that's very much how I see it for you guys. And then of course, maybe furthermore, you have all of this trust with your clients. They share a lot of information with you about their real estate portfolios. And of course, a scientific benchmark like CRREM can only exist with a really, really good basis of information and data. So I think like longer term, it would be really amazing to explore different ways that we can work with our licensed partners to kind of crowdsource, if you will, data points to help fuel a very scientifically grounded set of CRREM pathways. So something for the future.
Marcel, anything you'd like to add about the value of this partnership from Lookthrough side?
No, I mean, totally agree to what Andrea just said. I think much like we are the rubber to hit the ground, right? We need a direction to go to, and we need a guidance that we can tell our clients, listen, this is the scientific research that tells you whether or not you're doing the right thing. And we then need to help our clients to find guidance within that path, right? Because every portfolio is different, and there's always complexity and restraints. And there are things that clients would like to do, but there are also the reality of what clients are able to do. And this is often also driven by cost, right? So you need to find a cost-effective way on how to meet those targets and how to follow that guideline. And I think if it wasn't for the help of a lot of data, as you rightfully say, clients wouldn't be able to find that path because the complexity at some point is just too big. I mean, when we are calculating data on behalf of our clients, and let's just assume we have a client with 100 buildings, we're calculating about 100 to the power of 12 data points that we will then take into consideration when we try to guide their portfolio through the path that basically science dictates. And this is where the two things come together.
Before we move on to discussing CRREM's role and industry challenges, probably something for our listeners to be aware of is that you have changed your terminology recently. Can you just explain that in a nutshell, what that means?
Yes, of course, indeed. So we recently decided to change the term stranding year, which was part and parcel with how CRREM kind of emerged with that kind of big red flag signal, which I think was really effective in creating those red flag signals to get attention, to draw in attention, to draw a sense of urgency, etc. So we think it was the right thing at that time. However, moving forward, we have decided to change that terminology to the CRREM misalignment year. And the reason why, well, there are two main ones. The first one is that I think the term stranding year is kind of an official term, not just from CRREM. It is like a globally recognized term of a financial asset that has more or less been written down to zero value. It has been totally eroded. And frankly speaking, that's just not the reality that we are in when it comes to transition risk pricing yet. These are not written down to zero. There could be some impairments, certainly could be some impairments in terms of things such as financial fines or higher expenses and so on that do get accounted for in the financial models, but it is not fully stranded. They are income generating assets still in many, many cases, in most cases. So we started to think, hey, is this still an appropriate term that we are using to indicate what our tool can offer? And we ultimately decided that no, it wasn't, and that we would lose credibility long term if we would continue using the term stranded assets, but in fact, they were not financially stranded. So that was something that really drove our decision there. But then furthermore, and above and beyond that, is the adaptability that is inherent in an asset class like real estate. So that's very different than a stranded asset that is just completely written off to zero, cannot be adapted. There's always some form of residual value that sits in a real estate investment, whether that be pure land investments or the building stock itself that actually can be retrofitted. And we want to highlight that potential to be retrofitted and thereby value enhanced. So it's those kind of twofold thoughts and decisions that drove us to this new terminology.
Maybe if I can just add to that, I think this makes a lot of sense, right? Because you would, first of all, you would always have the value of the land. So, I mean, the worst that could happen is that your building depreciates to the value of the land, basically, where the building has no more value. And the other effect is that depending on the region that you're in, I think a terminology of stranded asset, like in Switzerland, as an example, I don't really think we have something like a stranded asset in Switzerland. So I think changing the terminology makes a lot of sense, although people always understood what was meant by it. So it wasn't really wrong in that sense, but I think it maybe wasn't future-proof enough. It was maybe a bit confusing, but I think people always understood what was meant.
Yeah, I mean, it was I didn't realize this, frankly, but it was actually quite contentious for some parties. So in some areas, it really started to push the wrong buttons for certain people and certain parties. So that also, we needed to take that into consideration, certainly.
Let's talk about CRREM's role. Just in case there are people listening who are not familiar with CRREM, for example, Andrea, could you just explain, probably more for real estate professionals or sustainability experts, what is CRREM's mission and why it's so important right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So our mission is to drive transparency around climate risk and alignment. So that is what we do, and we do that at a very granular manner. So for anyone who is really not familiar with CRREM, the basis is that we develop a forward-looking trajectory for how buildings need to decarbonize and improve their energy efficiency to stay within a certain carbon budget. And that's usually a downward sloping line, given that the carbon budget gets smaller and smaller every year out to a certain time period where it's essentially used up. So that is what we do in a nutshell. And this is used by different types of stakeholders in the real estate market because it's globally applicable. We have more than 1,000 of these pathways, and they're built by property type and region. So in some areas that's city, in some areas that's climate zone, in other areas that's country. But it's very granular in the sense that it's this property type regional match, and they're also applicable separately for carbon and for energy. So we have many pathways that make it really, really visible and clear and transparent what these buildings need to do in order to stay within that carbon budget. Hence the science-based nature of the pathways.
Can you touch on that, the science-based pathways?
Well, the pathways are developed by now the CRREM Foundation, but they are governed by what's called the Technical Council. And this is a new council that has only just been announced late last week, the members of this council. So we're very excited to have a really great group. But in terms of the science-based nature, so more than half of this technical council needs to come from the academia world and or like independent research institutions. So they, for now on, are the ones that will continue to oversee and govern the CRREM pathways and the CRREM global methodology. And the global methodology, in the terms of the science-based nature, is built on a kind of limit. And the limit indicates how much carbon can the world emit before we breach a various temperature change scenario. So that's kind of the level and threshold that we work within to ensure that buildings are playing their role in managing climate risk on a global basis.
And this, of course, leads to owners and investors. They have some challenges in meeting those decarbonization targets, right? So I'd like to hear from both of you, what do you see are the challenges for these owners and investors in how they can meet these decarbonization targets?
I think there's been what I believe a bit of conception in the climate policies. And I think the reality is that most buildings, at least that we look at, are investment properties. So from the perspective of the owner, the utmost duty or of that property is to create a return. And I think we need to find solutions for the building owners to decarbonize within the budget of what they are able to do while keeping their return up, right? So this is really important. And I think that just investing into properties without looking at the yield or the return side of the property is just simply an unrealistic pipe drive. So I think this may be true for governments or bodies like that who don't really need to show a return, but for all the other properties, they need to show a return. And unless ways can be found to decarbonize those buildings and make energy efficiency better within the possibilities or the framework of those returns, then it's just unrealistic that asset owners at scale will actually move towards the targets. So of course you could put on regulatory pressure, which then of course will force them to do it, but that's just not probably a very smart move. So the much smarter move is to actually use all the science that we have and use all the technology that we have in order to find a solution that is right for each building and an aggregate level for each portfolio. And those solutions need to be found, and that's where we come in to simulate on behalf of our clients what can be done within the budgets that they have so that they can maintain the primary purpose of the real estate, which in their case is creating a yield, while driving towards energy efficiency and carbon neutrality. So for us, we are very happy for the science-based guidance that CRREM gives us so that we can actually use a benchmark to simulate for our clients. But then for the clients, it's really relevant that they can do this within a budget that is reasonable and realistic, because otherwise they will simply refrain from doing it because they just cannot afford.
I completely 100% agree with absolutely everything that Marcel has said. That's just the fundamental reality of the world that we are in, that this has to be investable and it has to drive returns. And in terms of challenges, that was your question. Another challenge I see is not just IRR hurdles, right? Because many of these projects actually will achieve the required return hurdles. However, the payback period might be longer than the hold period of these assets. So that's something that is, also I think can be a very significant challenge, especially in assets that do need that type of renovation work. Because like if we look at value add strategies where most of that renovation and intervention work is going to be executed, the hold periods are very short. So it's a kind of flip strategy. And in those flip strategies, you need not just IRR hurdles to be met, you need them to be met fast. So I think that's another type of like institutionalized kind of barrier, if you will, or challenge that exists.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that technology keeps evolving, right? So it probably makes sense to do all those quick wins that you can that are within your budget and do them relatively quick. So don't wait. But then also keep in mind that most likely in 10 years, we will have totally different heating systems than we have today. So we have a lot of industry partners from the heating, OEM manufacturers. And we are asking them about the heating systems that they see likely to enter the market within the next 10 years. And almost all of them tell us that there will be hydrogen heating systems for private use available within 10 years. Right. So I think there are going to be a lot of technological solutions that will help us get there. At some point, we will also require carbon capture. But I also think it's important to start with all those things that can easily be implemented quickly at relatively small budgets. Start with those and don't wait.
I also noticed recently a fund has started out of the States, but it's coming to Europe, where they're going to start offering financing tied to the building rather than the owner. So this may negate some of the issue of timing factors. But there are other areas of innovation. I'm interested to hear from both of you if you have other ideas or thoughts about what are the greatest opportunities for new solutions for real estate decarbonization.
Yeah, I think this is maybe a few years out because the real estate market, I don't believe is there yet. This was, I would call it leading edge. And that is very much taking into consideration occupancy in energy optimization. So right now we really treat energy efficiency as a pure energy divided by meter squared type of calculation, but that doesn't necessarily promote the kind of density that we need in order to use land wisely, to use our spaces wisely, etc. And I would love to see more innovation in this area because I think it's a very big factor of what a sustainable built environment really looks like and means. And it's definitely not rewarded in the CRREM pathways, given that we really are a meters squared based pathway. So something that I'm curious about, I want to learn more about, and I would love to work with the market to kind of tease out over time.
I think you're highlighting to a very important point. I think a lot of calculations are today done on the theoretical consumption of a building. So what is the energy requirement of a certain building type? But what you're referring to is much more of what is the actual energy usage and based on not just square meters, but also people that are there. We have one client, I can't mention who it is, but it's a government body, have a lot of buildings. And from a pure perspective of theoretical requirement, a lot of their buildings would need to be renovated. But the reality is that many of those buildings are only used a couple of days per year, right? So if you are coming from the theoretical consumption, then yes, you would need to renovate them. But if you're coming from an actual consumption, then those are going to be the last properties you touch, right? So I think it's important to somehow get there. And I think what we lack today is good enough data. And I think once we have a lot more smart meters installed, and maybe also occupancy sensors, as you mentioned, installed, we will at some point have that data so that we can start optimizing for the actual use of the property and not for its theoretical purpose. And I think that will be an important step of getting us all to the targets that we have.
Yeah, amazing. And then I guess there's one other element, which is a little bit in the same vein, and that is hour matching and optimization. And what I mean here is optimization to the grid's cleanliness or lack thereof. So we know that the grid changes minute by minute, right? What is the emission factor in this grid at this moment? And right now, building systems are not really being optimized to run and process in accordance with when the grid happens to be cleanest. So I think we as an industry could just simply reduce our emissions hugely by just changing when we do things. Not what, when.
You're absolutely right. Timing is of big importance in all of this.
This is going to take quite a bit of collaboration, I imagine, across the industry. Would you say that's probably the main area where the industry is moving too slowly?
Actually, within our industry, within the real estate industry, I think there is a lot of collaboration. I'm always really I would say even impressed by the amount of collaboration and openness that our industry has. But I would say across industries here, because real estate is like, it's just a platform kind of. It requires a tenant, which is not really the real estate industry anymore. And then it requires power suppliers and other like fuels providers, which is also not the real estate industry anymore. So I think if you look both upstream and downstream in terms of the real estate supply chain, I think that would be amazing if we could have more collaboration across sectors to really think about how can we stimulate an energy transition for the entire built environment, not just the buildings component.
Well, let's hope the right people are listening to this and we can start to make further progress. But in the meantime, what could organizations like CRREM and Lookthrough do together to accelerate the part of the process that we can have some kind of impact on?
I think it ultimately needs both parties, and then of course it needs a lot more, right? It needs the parties that finance all of this, and it needs the tenants that play along, and it is an entire spectrum of people that need to be involved. But I think the two parties that are here in this call are a very important role at the beginning of that journey.
Yeah, agree. I mean, our mission can only go so far without the support, the growth that our license partners have. You guys are our mechanism for reaching the real world, right? We're just a benchmark, just a pathway. We can't, that's the kind of the full extent of what we're going to do. You guys are the ones really making this tangible, usable, accessible for implementation. So I see it as a full ecosystem that has synergies in both ways.
Are there any emerging trends or regulatory shifts that our listeners should be paying a close attention to right now that we haven't touched on yet?
So from a regulatory shift perspective, I think it depends heavily on where you are. We all know that in the US and under the current administration, the trend has been a bit revoked. That is not true for certain states like New York and California. We know in Europe with the omnibus program, people have been a bit less ambitious about their goals. But we also know that these things come and go in waves, right? And we see from the very large institutional asset owners that they are not really affected by these waves because they know that it's a temporary thing. So they have a long-term target and they continue to follow it. So I think from a regulatory perspective, we will always see some changes, but I do think that the large institutional asset owners are all in agreement that we need to go towards net zero, and independent of the current political favor, they will follow that path, right? And that path ultimately being the CRREM path.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. I think there's a slight difference, right, between Europe and the US in terms of how regulation is implemented. And in the US, it's a federated system. So in that regard, all of the decisions around regulation in the built environment come bottom up. They're coming from the lowest level of government, which is the city governments. However, what it results in is a very, very fragmented regulatory regime, and most, as you probably would know, I mean, most real estate investors tend to be targeting assets in those major metro areas, which still do have quite an important regulatory role there. So you have all your economic value of real estate investments in these cities where regulation is still happening. So if you're a real estate investor, if you're investing even within the US or globally, you're trying to navigate a lot of different shapes and sizes of regulation, which becomes extremely challenging when you're trying to assess transition risk at scale across your whole portfolio. It becomes super, super complicated and dare I say difficult. I tried to do it at PGGM, but that's where CRREM really can play an important supporting role in allowing investors to kind of slice through all of that to get a good benchmark that you can feel pretty certain of. If it aligns here, it aligns there too. So that's been a good way to put that into practice.
And from our perspective, we also much prefer the CRREM path as a alignment than EPC ratings, because EPC ratings even more so have that problem of fragmentation, and you cannot compare an EPC rating in the Netherlands to the one in Germany or the one in the UK or the one in the US. It will always be calculated in a totally different way, quite misleading, right? And if you have a scientific path based on carbon, then that's somewhat set in stone, and that will be the same wherever you are. And of course, there are local differences because the grid energy is different. It's a lot dirtier in Germany than it is in Switzerland, as an example. But apart from that, you have a common denominator, which makes it a lot easier to basically point your buildings and say, okay, this is how they compare. And this is what I think is a big problem in EPC ratings, is that they're just totally confusing going from one county to the next.
I've heard with the EPBD that they're going to try and harmonize EPC ratings, which is going to create, as you've already highlighted, Marcel, a whole set of challenges of how that would even be possible. And even if it is happening, it still doesn't align with Switzerland or with the UK or with the US. So it's maybe smoothed out a small fraction of the market, but would not solve the problems that we currently face from that aspect. I have a question for both of you. If you could give one piece of advice to a real estate professional who's starting their decarbonization journey, and there are still a number of those people out there, what would that piece of advice be?
My advice would be to start simply. And why I say that like that, because the sustainability and ESG world has become really complicated. There are many, many, many frameworks to choose from that have a lot of different topic areas, subject matters to take into account. And I think we, over the last maybe 8 years, five to 8 years, we've kind of drifted away from this core principle of materiality, financial materiality or impact materiality. It doesn't matter to me. Any investor can choose which version of materiality they want to use, but use it because it does help you to distinguish what matters, what doesn't matter. And I will come back to this time and time again that I still believe my biggest advice will be to focus. And I think using the principles of materiality allows for that level of focus and simplicity.
I would agree. I think pick your battles, right? Because you can't get everything right. So focus on the things that are relevant to you as an organization, and then find the right guidelines or the right path, which, in our world needs to be the CRREM path, and find ways to follow that and focus on the things that can be easily done quickly. So I think be smart about it, but focus on those things that can be done quickly. So all those things that have a relatively short payback, that aren't too expensive, but that do have an impact, start with those. And already you will be a lot better than what you were before. And then within the life cycle of all your assets, find the right moment in time to replace them. I think be smart about it and pick your battle and focus on what you really want to achieve. And I think the CRREM path is a very solid pick or choice on what you want to follow as a target. I personally think it's a lot smarter to follow the CRREM path than to follow EPC ratings for the very same reasons I said before, because they're not standardized, and also because I'm a true believer that if in 10 years' time you have a building with a good EPC rating, but you still have a lot of emissions, you will need to explain that. And on the other hand side, if you have 0 emissions and you have an autonomous house with solar panels, but because you have very bad windows, your EPC rating is bad, I don't really think anyone will care. So I think focusing on decarbonization and therefore, take the CRREM path, because it is the de facto standard out there on how you should get to net zero. So focusing on that, I believe, is the one smart thing that investors need to do if this falls within the targets that they want to achieve.
If I can be so bold here as to say that if you are starting on the decarbonization journey, it would probably be quite a sensible move to contact someone like Lookthrough to help you recognize, for a start, what are the quick wins? Where should you start? What is the process? And of course, if you come to someone like Lookthrough, of course, you're going to get access to the CRREM path as well to show you the way. So that's just my little plug for Lookthrough there. But looking ahead, what are you both most optimistic about in the industry's transition to net zero?
I think the area that has brought me the most optimism just over the last few months has been coming from the banking side. But wow, I've been extremely impressed with how some of the banks and private lenders are producing very conscious and very concerted approaches to decarbonizing their own portfolios. And that is such a fundamental piece of the recipe for real estate investments across not just institutional quality, but all the way, the full spectrum of asset qualities. And I think that's going to be an extremely important leverage point in driving the transition forward. So something that I feel really optimistic about.
I agree, and I would even go a step further. I would say the capital markets in general are starting to recognize that there is value in a more efficient or cleaner building, and that you will have a market advantage in the future if you do have such a building. And I think as soon as capital markets start to appreciate that, things will move that direction, and we can see that happening, and that I think is a good sign for all of us. And I think when we reached the stage where a investor knows that by investing, and I'm just making an example, investing 200,000 euros in retrofitting the building, but increasing the value of the building by doing so by 400,000 euros, then that becomes kind of like a no-brainer, right? And this is what we see happening with good quality buildings that are, not falling into that category of red flags as defined by the CRREM path. And I think once the capital markets pick that up, this entire process will speed up, because all of a sudden everybody will jump at these opportunities to create more value in the building by making those energetic renovations. And as soon as that is driven, as said, by capital markets, things will go very quick.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I even see this in the public markets. So the capital markets it's even going all the way up to let's say the top of the food chain, so to say, in the public real estate investment market as well. You see a lot of real estate investors, listed real estate investors, concretely pricing transition risks into equity valuations. And that is not just one building at a time, right? That's many, many thousands of buildings at a time. So it's scaling fast.
Before we wrap up, just imagine I wasn't on this call. Is there anything you'd like to ask each other about your work or the future of the industry?
Yeah, well, I would love to know how you came to be the CEO of Lookthrough.
I became the CEO because I founded it, and it's a spin-out from another company that I founded 20 years ago that has turned out to be Lookthrough. So we are relatively new at real estate, and we look at real estate as a data problem, which of course from an architectural or engineering point of view isn't always right. But I think we're bringing a totally new perspective to the problem, which is just looking at the data. And I think when you are having a top-down approach like we do, where most of our clients own very large portfolios, you need to start with data. And I think this is where we come in. And in the meantime, I think we're fairly respected also by engineers and architects, because our results, of course, over time have become better and better. But I've been fascinated by CRREM, and I think it's a fantastic initiative. And as said, I'm really happy to see some leadership now taking over and bringing it to the next level. And I'm very much looking forward to all the things that we can do together. From my side also, Andrea, thanks a lot for taking up this leadership role at CRREM, and thanks a lot for the great talk. And Olaf, to you, thanks for organizing.
You're welcome. I want to take a moment to thank you both for such an engaging and insightful conversation. I hope this has helped our listeners to get a bit better understanding about the synergy of Lookthrough and CRREM, and also what CRREM is doing as the basis for this process. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about CRREM, you can go to crrem.org and about Lookthrough at lookthrough.com. There will be links in the description at the end. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your network. And we'll be back soon with more conversations at the intersection of real estate and sustainability here at the Lookthrough Lens. Thanks again to our guests and to all of you for listening.